Well, good morning again, everyone.
Good morning.
Most of us probably know the old joke that goes, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. And I'm sure that most of us can relate to that in some way or another. We probably have all, at some point in our lives, made lots of plans for ourselves, only to discover that none of the things we planned came out the way we had expected. Life is just too unpredictable to be able to plan with certainty. So does that mean that we shouldn't plan? Does it mean that we should just let life happen to us and go with the flow? Well, in today's gospel, Jesus tells us another parable. This one about the parable of 10 virgins who go out to meet a bridegroom. We'll be looking at Matthew's Gospel, chapter 25, starting at verse 1. So Jesus begins the parable. The kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish, and 5 were wise. The foolish ones, when taking their lamps, brought no oil with them, but the wise brought flasks of oil with their lamps. Now, my question when I hear that is, how did these wise virgins know that the problem they would encounter would be a lack of oil? How about if there had been another problem that they hadn't planned for? Would they still be wise? Well, Jesus continues. Since the bridegroom was long delayed, they all became drowsy and fell asleep. Well, it seems to me that we can imagine that the wise virgins slept well because they believed they were prepared, and so they had nothing to worry about. But my guess is the foolish virgins slept just as well because they were probably just ignorant of anything that might go wrong. After all, they are foolish. And we all know that ignorance is bliss. Well, Jesus continues. At midnight there was a cry, "Behold the bridegroom, come out to meet him." Then all those virgins got up and trimmed their lamps. The foolish ones said to the wise, "Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out." But the wise ones replied, "No, for there may not be enough for us and you. Go instead to the merchants and buy some for yourselves." Now, this part of the parable has always struck me as odd. If Jesus is trying to hold these wise virgins out as models for us to be able to get into the kingdom of heaven, don't you think they should be sharing what they have? Isn't that what we're always taught, to share what we have? And yet, these wise virgins don't share. Well, maybe it's because in their wisdom they said, "Why should all of us fail just because some of you didn't prepare?" And I can imagine there are times in life when we have said that. A lot in today's church, with churches that are failing and being coupled with churches that are stable, we just might lose both of them as they struggle to survive. Or maybe the virgins are wise because they know that in life we can't always depend that someone else will bail us out. And they're just living that reality out. We can't always depend that someone's going to cover for our shortcomings. Jesus continues, "While they went off to buy it, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went into the wedding feast with him. Then the door was locked. Afterwards, the other virgins came and said, 'Lord, Lord, open the door for us.' But he said in reply, 'Amen, I say to you, I do not know you.'" Now, this parable has always struck me as a bit unfair. Because, after all, as I said earlier, how did the wise virgins know that the problem would be oil? Suppose the problem had been a wild beast that came and ate all 10 virgins. Would they still be wise? Is wisdom a matter of being able to predict the future? Are those of us who are good at seeing ahead the ones who are going to survive, and those of us who can't predict the future are going to be on the outside looking in? Well, I'm not really sure that's what Jesus is saying. I'm not sure at all that he's saying that we need to be able to predict the future. What he's saying is that the virgins who found themselves on the inside were there because they were wise, and the ones who were on the outside were there because they were foolish. So this, in essence, is a parable not about predicting the future, but about simply being wise. And so we have to ask the question, what is the wisdom that these 5 virgins had that the other 5 did not? Well, you know, there sure are enough problems in our own life to tempt all of us to remain ignorant of what is happening in the world. After the mass shootings in Las Vegas, in which 58 people were killed, how could we not just want to crawl into a hole and hide ourselves from the world when we hear of the horror of the shooting in Sutherland, Texas? After seeing what Hurricanes Harvey and Irma did to Texas and Florida, how can we not just want to hide from the further destruction of Hurricane Maria? In fact, there's a huge concern today that people are beginning to become numb to all of the disasters in our world. Mass shootings and even murders in our own streets are becoming so frequent that folks are just shrugging their shoulders and concluding that there's nothing we can do about it. Major relief organizations are concerned that many people are experiencing what they call donor fatigue after being asked to support so many efforts in such a short period of time. The reality is, however, that those who face these disasters directly don't have much choice in the matter. They can't choose to remain ignorant of these things just so they can sleep well at night. They have to come to terms with the reality of pain and struggle in life in order to engage the world around them. So why shouldn't we have to come to the same terms? You see, again, the lesson of the parable isn't that we have to be able to predict the future in order to be prepared. It's that we can't remain ignorant of the realities of the world around us if we expect to engage it in the way God calls us. The wise virgins weren't wise because they took the extra oil with them. They took the extra oil with them because they were wise. They knew that they just couldn't ignore the possible challenges that they might face in life, so that if they wanted to ignore them, they could be, as we might say, fat, dumb, and happy. They knew that they had to be prepared to engage the world the way they found it. And so the first step toward wisdom is simply being aware of what's going on around us. Our first reading from the book of Wisdom tells us that wisdom is found by those who seek her. Wisdom will not just fall into our laps. We have to be aware of the world around us to engage it as it is. But with all the problems in the world, how do we keep on going? How do we engage the world without being overcome by it? Well, not by remaining ignorant, for in the long run, that simply is not an option. Rather, we survive our world and we celebrate our lives by drawing on the wisdom that comes from our Christian faith. In our second reading today, the Thessalonians themselves are facing a crisis. You see, they expected Jesus to return in their lifetimes, but now their loved ones are dying off, and Jesus still hasn't come back. They're afraid that if they're not alive when he returns, they won't be taken to heaven with him. So St. Paul tells them that it's okay to grieve the deaths of their loved ones, but they should not grieve as people without hope. He assures them that because of their faith in Jesus Christ, all of them, living and dead, will rise with Christ on the last day. And as a result, he concludes, we shall always be with the Lord. It seems to me that this kind of faith is critical to facing a world of pain and suffering. The faith that Christ will always be with us, no matter what may come our way, and that we will always live with Christ in a new life that he promises. While we may grieve our losses in life, we do not have to face them as people without hope. We do not have to remain ignorant of them in order to survive. Our faith in Jesus Christ, uniting us to his suffering as well as to his resurrection, gives us the wisdom to engage the world around us as it really is. Because wisdom rooted in faith is wrapped in hope. And it's hope that allows us to experience the suffering in this world. Hope allows us not only to survive our struggles in life, but to flourish in the joy that comes from our faith that Jesus Christ is risen from the dead. And so in light of mass shootings and destructive hurricanes and other horrors in our world, we cannot become cold or callous to them. We need to pray for the wisdom to acknowledge their reality and to respond to them in the hope that Jesus Christ promises us a better world to come. None of us can predict the future. And when we make plans as though we can, God sure does get a good laugh. No, we can't predict the future in order to plan for it, but we can cultivate the wisdom necessary to engage it. For it is wisdom that calls us to wake from our slumber and to resist the temptation to remain ignorant of the world around us. And it's wisdom rooted in faith that empowers us to hope for a better world, even as we see it the way it truly is. We may not know what tomorrow holds, but we sure do know who holds tomorrow. Amen.